May 29th, 1953, 8:30 a.m. After decades of failures, loss, and death, Mount Everest is finally conquered. New Zealander Edmund Hillary and Nepali Sherpa Tenzing Norgay stand at the highest point on Earth, 8,848 meters above sea level. Before them stretches the endless sky, the clouds, and an almost sacred silence. They remain on the summit for only 15 minutes, but it is enough to change the course of human history. For decades, Everest had been the symbol of the impossible. Dozens of expeditions had perished on its slopes, defeated by the cold, the lack of oxygen, and the brutal altitude. But in 1953, the British expedition led by John Hunt set out to prove that the limits of human endurance are defined only by belief itself. Their journey began long before that date. Months of preparation, hundreds of tons of equipment, and dozens of men climbing step by step toward the summit, risking everything with every breath. This is a story of courage, patience, and perseverance. A story of how mankind conquered not only a mountain, but itself. In March 1953, the narrow streets of Kathmandu filled with an unusual noise. Dozens of climbers, porters, doctors, and journalists had arrived. The British expedition, led by Colonel John Hunt, was preparing for what many called the last great battle between man and nature, the attempt to conquer Everest. Just weeks earlier, the team had departed from England, traveling through India and into Nepal. Their route wound through mountain villages, deep valleys, and frozen passes. Every crate of supplies, tents, food, oxygen cylinders, and scientific instruments was carried on the backs of yaks and local porters. In total, more than 350 people were part of the expedition, including the indispensable Sherpas, without whom this climb would have been impossible. High above the land, hidden in the clouds, stood Everest. Its white summit shimmered through the mist, appearing almost unreal. In nearby villages, people called it by its ancient name, Sagarmatha, the goddess of the sky. For the Nepalese, it was sacred. For the climbers, it was a challenge that had already claimed many lives. Colonel Hunt divided the team into specialized groups. Some scouted the route, others built supply camps higher up the slope. Among the climbers stood a tall, quiet man from New Zealand, Edmund Hillary, a beekeeper turned mountaineer. His endurance and calm determination impressed even the most seasoned explorers. Working beside him was Tenzing Norgay, an experienced Sherpa who had climbed high on Everest 6 times before, but had never reached the top. Between them, a silent bond of respect quickly formed. The journey to base camp took nearly 3 weeks. Day after day, the team advanced, crossing rivers, climbing ridges, and battling exhaustion. The weather changed by the hour, blazing sun by day, freezing winds by night. Fatigue settled into every step, yet no one turned back. When they finally stood before the Khumbu icefall, the mountain revealed itself in all its beauty and danger. The glacier stretched upward like a frozen staircase into the clouds, glistening, majestic, and deadly. That day, Colonel Hunt addressed his men. "Beyond that icefall," he said, "begins the real Everest." And from that moment on, every man understood. The way back might never come. Above the base camp towered a vast white wall of ice, the Khumbu icefall. Its maze of crevasses and frozen towers seemed almost impossible to cross. Here began the true Everest, a place where a single mistake could mean death. In early April 1953, Hunt's team began their reconnaissance of the glacier. The climbers moved slowly, carefully testing each step. The ice cracked beneath their boots, echoing like distant thunder. Some crevasses plunged dozens of meters deep, and even ropes offered little sense of safety. To forge a path forward, the team used aluminum ladders to bridge the gaps between the ice walls. It was dangerous, exhausting work. Every movement had to be deliberate. At over 5,000 meters above sea level, even breathing became a struggle. Faces were burned by the wind, hands torn by ropes and cold. During those days, Tenzing Norgay stood out. His experience in the Himalayas and calm confidence gave strength to those around him. He often went first, testing the ice and showing others where to step. His movements were precise, almost graceful. He knew the mountain as if it were alive. Beside him worked Hillary, whose strength and precision proved vital in the most treacherous sections. Together, they formed an extraordinary partnership, a Sherpa and a mountaineer, two worlds united by one purpose. One morning, the group became trapped between two towering ice walls. The wind rose sharply, clouds closed in, and the temperature dropped below -20. There was no turning back. Hunt gave the order to move forward. The climbers crawled between the shifting walls of ice inch by inch until they finally reached open ground. That day, they climbed to over 6,000 meters, establishing the first advanced camp above the icefall. The evening was quiet. Inside their tents, under the dim glow of lanterns, the men ate their frozen meals in silence. Each one knew this was only the beginning. 5 more camps still lay ahead, and beyond them, the death zone. The next morning, as the sun touched the peaks, the ice sparkled like glass. It was beautiful, almost holy, but every man there understood the truth. The beauty of this mountain was an illusion. Everest forgives neither pride nor weakness. After conquering the Khumbu icefall, Hunt's team entered a new phase of the expedition. Ahead lay endless snowfields and slopes, where even the strongest men began to falter. The altitude now exceeded 6,000 meters, and the air had grown painfully thin. Every breath was a struggle. The route led through the western CWM, a vast glacial valley surrounded by the towering walls of Lhotse, Nuptse, and Everest itself. The sun scorched the snow by day, while at night the temperature plunged below -30. The men moved slowly, step by step, each burdened with heavy loads of gear. Even a few meters of ascent felt like eternity. In these brutal conditions, the strength of the team became clear. There were over 30 Sherpas, moving faster and with seemingly greater ease than their European counterparts. They carried oxygen cylinders, tents, food, and fuel, the lifeblood of the expedition. Without them, survival would have been impossible. Each day, Colonel Hunt gathered the climbers in a small circle to discuss the plan ahead. The weather changed by the hour, forcing rapid decisions. Winds from the summit could transform clear skies into a blizzard within minutes. The climb from Camp 3 to Camp 4 proved especially dangerous. The slopes were coated in unstable snow, hiding deep crevasses beneath. Climbers fixed ropes, driving ice screws into the frozen walls. At one point, a Sherpa slipped and fell, but the rope held, a stark reminder that the mountain allowed no mistakes. Tenzing and Hillary worked side by side, scouting the route and leading the climbs. They spoke little. Here, every word cost oxygen. Only short commands, heavy breathing, and glances filled with understanding. At roughly 7,000 meters, they established Camp 4. Bodies were exhausted, oxygen supplies were thinning, and food had turned rock solid in the cold. Sleep came in short bursts, interrupted by headaches and nausea, symptoms of the relentless altitude sickness. That evening, Colonel Hunt wrote in his journal, We stand at the edge of human endurance. Ahead lies only cold, wind, and faith. Yet in the eyes of these men, I see a determination unlike anything found in the valleys below. Night descended over the camp. In the darkness, among snow and wind, the faint glow of lanterns shimmered like distant stars. The mountain remained silent, but somewhere high above the clouds, the summit was waiting. When the expedition climbed above 8,000 meters, they entered what mountaineers call the death zone. Here, the air holds less than 1/3 of the oxygen found at sea level. The human body slowly begins to die, even at rest. Every step, every breath became a fragile negotiation with survival. The weather turned against them. Winds from the summit roared like a living creature. Snow swirled through the air, forming a wall of ice and mist. The men moved painfully slowly, sometimes only a few dozen meters per hour. Every movement required immense effort. Tenzing Norgay and Edmund Hillary remained with the advance team. Their task was to inspect the route above Camp 6 and prepare the way for the final assault. The oxygen equipment became critical. Masks froze from the inside, tubes clogged with ice. The climbers had to stop repeatedly to clear them, losing precious time and warmth. One evening, as the sun disappeared behind Lhotse, Hillary wrote in his journal a single line: "We live between the sky and nothing." It was no exaggeration. Everyone understood if the weather shifted even slightly, the descent could become impossible. Lower down, teams prepared backup groups, but hopes were fading. Colonel Hunt made a crucial decision. The first summit attempt would be made by Tom Bourdillon and Charles Evans. They reached nearly 8,750 meters, but a malfunction in their oxygen systems forced them to turn back, just short of the summit. Their failure could have broken morale, yet it did the opposite. It lit a spark. Now it was Hillary and Tenzing's turn. They would make their final push on May 29th, 1953. The night before, they rested in Camp 9, perched at over 8,500 meters. The wind battered their tent, and the temperature plunged below -40. They did not sleep. They simply lay still, listening as the mountain tried to tear their fragile shelter apart. At dawn, when the first light touched the peaks, they began to prepare. They checked the oxygen tanks, cleared the frozen masks, secured their gear. Hillary glanced at Tenzing. He gave a single nod. No words were needed. Ahead lay the final 300 meters to the top. And both men knew this day would either make history or end their lives. May 29th, 1953. The night in Camp 9 was endless. The wind howled like a living thing, and the thin nylon walls of the tent trembled under its fury. Inside sat two men, preparing for the most important climb of their lives. At 4 a.m., Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay lit their small kerosene stoves to melt ice for water. Every movement was deliberate and slow. Even the simplest action felt like an act of endurance. The air was razor thin, cutting through their lungs with every breath. They spoke little, exchanging only short phrases while checking their gear. An hour later, they were ready. Hillary tied the rope around his harness. Tenzing checked the oxygen cylinders. The wind eased for a moment. Ahead lay the summit, only 300 meters away, but the hardest distance of all. They climbed slowly, as if through water. Each step required total focus. The ice was hard as stone. The sun broke through the clouds, casting blinding light over the snow, yet bringing no warmth. only glare and fatigue. At around 8,750 meters, they faced an obstacle that would later be known as the Hillary Step, a near-vertical wall of rock and ice about 12 meters high. Its surface was frozen and slick, whipped by icy gusts of wind. Hillary studied the face, driving his ice axe into the wall to create small footholds. Inch by inch, he climbed upward until he reached a narrow ledge. From there, he fixed the rope and helped Tenzing follow. Beyond the step lay the final stretch, a long, slow ridge that curved toward the peak. Every breath felt like fire. The sound of their hearts and the hiss of the oxygen flow merged into one rhythm. And then, there was no more up. Only a small, snow-covered plateau, surrounded by the vast emptiness of the sky. Hillary and Tenzing stood on the summit of the world. 8:30 a.m., May 29, 1953. They remained there for just 15 minutes. Tenzing placed in the snow the flags of Nepal, Great Britain, India, and the United Nations. Hillary took a few photographs, the last before the wind began to rise again. There were no shouts, no cheers, just silence. They both knew the truth every climber learns. Reaching the top is only half the journey. The hardest part was still to come, the summit. A silence that exists nowhere else on Earth. Only the sound of breath through oxygen masks, the hiss of cylinders, and the faint rhythm of a heartbeat echoing through the frozen air. Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay stood at 8,848 meters, the highest point on the planet. Beneath them stretched a sea of clouds. Beyond it, the endless horizon of the Himalayas. The wind was so strong it forced them to crouch. They did not see the world as others do, from below, but from above, wrapped in cold, sacred stillness. Hillary took out his camera and snapped a few photographs of Tenzing. The Sherpa held a small Nepali flag and smiled with his eyes behind the frost on his mask. Then he placed 4 flags in the snow, those of Nepal, Great Britain, India, and the United Nations. Small pieces of fabric fluttered wildly in the thin air at the roof of the world. Hillary took no pictures of himself. He had given the camera to Tenzing. It didn't matter. He simply stood there, gazing over the vast landscape of ridges and peaks that stretched in every direction. In that moment, he felt no triumph, only a deep understanding that nature had allowed them to stand there. For a moment. "We didn't conquer the mountain," he would later say. "We conquered ourselves." Time passed quickly. After 15 minutes, they both knew it was time to descend. The mountain did not tolerate hesitation. Tenzing looked down once more, toward the glaciers and shadows far below, and raised his hand, as if to salute all those who had tried before. Hillary went first, his boots sinking deep into the snow, the rope trailing behind him. Tenzing followed. Behind them, only their footprints remained, the single proof that humankind had truly touched the top of the world. The sky stayed clear, but dark clouds were already forming on the horizon. The wind grew stronger, reminding them that everyone who ascends must also return. Everest stood alone once more, but now the world knew its summit could be reached. And though neither man sought fame, their names, Hillary and Norgay, would forever remain there, in the place where air can barely sustain life. Yet human spirit proved stronger than the mountain itself. After 15 minutes on the summit, Hillary and Tenzing began their descent. The moment of triumph had passed, replaced by the cold awareness that the real danger still lay ahead. At over 8,000 meters, every step could mean the difference between life and death. The sun was already high, yet it offered no warmth. The wind had strengthened, whipping snow from the ridge and blinding their eyes. They moved slowly, using the ropes fixed during the climb. Their oxygen was nearly gone and the tanks grew lighter, but each breath was a fight for survival. At the Hillary step, they stopped once more. Going down was far harder than going up. The ice that had seemed solid before now crumbled beneath their boots. Hillary descended first, carefully hacking footholds with his ice axe while Tenzing belayed from above. At one point, the rope went taut. Hillary slipped. For a heartbeat, his life hung suspended in the thin air. But Tenzing held firm, driving his crampons into the ice, saving them both. Below, the long slope toward Camp 9 stretched endlessly. Their bodies were drained, every muscle screaming in pain. Yet through the blowing snow, they finally saw the faint outline of their tent. When they reached it, Hillary could barely stand. Seeing George Lowe, a friend from the expedition, step forward to meet them, he managed a tired grin and said the words that would echo through history. "We knocked the bastard off." But celebration would have to wait. That night, the mountain unleashed its fury. A fierce storm swept across the slopes, tearing at tents and burying ropes under drifts of snow. Inside their fragile shelters, the men sat huddled in silence, listening to the deafening roar of the wind only meters away. Several Sherpas in the lower camps were caught in avalanches, but miraculously survived. The storm raged for nearly 10 hours. By morning, the wind eased, leaving behind a desolate white wasteland, collapsed tents and snow piled high like waves frozen in motion. Everest had once again shown its power, as if to remind them that it had allowed humans to stand upon its summit only because it had chosen to. Exhausted but alive, Hillary and Tenzing began the long descent toward the lower camps. The worst was behind them, yet the meaning of their climb was clear. They had not conquered the mountain. They had conquered death itself. The descent took several more days. Exhausted but alive, Hillary, Tenzing, and the rest of the expedition made their way down to the lower camps. The euphoria had faded, replaced by deep fatigue and quiet relief. The mountain had left its mark on every one of them. When they finally reached base camp, there were tears on the faces of the men waiting for them. Colonel John Hunt embraced his climbers, not with ceremony, but with the quiet pride of a leader who knew the weight of what they had achieved. "You've done it," he said. "We've all done it." A few days later, messengers carried the news to Kathmandu, and from there, to the rest of the world. On June 2nd, 1953, the day of Queen Elizabeth II's coronation, British newspapers ran the same headline across their front pages: "Everest conquered." The story spread across the globe. For a world still healing from war and loss, it was a symbol of hope. Proof that humanity could still reach beyond its limits. In London, people poured into the streets, celebrating both the new queen and the triumph on the highest peak on Earth. Meanwhile, in Kathmandu, Hillary and Tenzing sat together in a small house, drinking tea in silence. Outside, reporters shouted questions and photographers jostled for pictures. Inside, there was only calm. When Tenzing was asked who had stepped onto the summit first, he replied simply, "We reached it together." For the world, it was a revelation. For them, it was just one more step upward. In the years that followed, both men became legends. Hillary was knighted. Tenzing became a national hero of Nepal. Yet neither spoke much about fame. They spoke of the mountain as if it were alive, as if it had allowed them to touch it for just a moment. Decades have passed, but the story of that morning, May 29, 1953, still endures. It is more than a tale of climbing the highest point on Earth. It is a story of the human spirit, of boundaries we create for ourselves, and of the moment we transcend them. And even now, when the wind sweeps across the icy slopes of Everest, it seems to whisper the names of those who first touched the sky: Hillary and Tenzing,